I love the idea of a fanless PC. Sure, you're leaving some performance on the table, but I just feel like hot air being blown at you doesn't feel very modern. It feels kind of antiquated. And so that's why I opted for the MacBook Air this year, and why I like the Dell XPS 9365. The XPS 9365 was Dell's last fanless high-end PC, and it is a really good one. Sure, it's a couple years old now, but it's incredibly impressive how much Dell can achieve in such a small fanless form factor. But this was unfortunately the last XPS to be fanless, and with Intel falling behind on performance, could we expect another fanless Dell XPS soon? Let's talk about it. This is NOISO, and this is the Dell XPS 9365 review. So the XPS 9365 has a very sleek form factor, very small, very compact. And what I love about it is it's got this black aluminum finish that is very nice. Now, since then, Dell's only released the silver and rose gold colors in the XPS line. And while those are nice, they don't look quite as striking as this color. What I like about this finish is it's kind of a flatter, thinner finish from the Surface Pro X and the Razer Blade that I've recently reviewed. It still attracts fingerprints quite a bit, but not quite to the extent. It's not quite as reflective, and it feels a lot smoother and like normal aluminum on the skin. And so I just feel like it's a very premium design, and even if I dinged it up a little bit, it would still look very nice. I really hope that Dell brings back this finish for a future version of the XPS, because it is one of my favorite colors on a laptop. Now, while this doesn't sport a 16:10 aspect ratio display like we've seen on a lot more modern laptops, the screen on it is actually quite good. It's got a 13.3-inch 1080p display, which is nice because on a lot of more modern Dell laptops, you actually can't get a touchscreen on 1080p displays. Instead, you have to hop for higher resolutions in order to get a touchscreen. This one is 1080p and absolutely incredible. It's bright, it's colorful, it's punchy, and despite it being relatively glossy for the touchscreen glass, it doesn't have nearly as much fingerprints or is not as reflective as a lot of other touchscreens that I've used. I love the fact that you can just take this display and flip it around and use it as a tablet. Obviously, this is the thing with all two-in-ones, but it's just something that I really appreciate coming off of my MacBook Air. By the way, I've seen several companies advertise tent mode in their advertisements for a product, and I've never actually used my laptop in this configuration. Let me know down in the comments if you have any real reason to do this, because frankly for me, I would just use it in, I guess, stand mode. I think that makes more sense and is more stable, but let me know down in the comments if you ever do this. As compared to the Spectre X360 that I reviewed a couple months back, this is significantly more compact and easier to kind of tote around. The Spectre was nice because it had higher end specs, because it did have a fan built in, but that actually ended up being one of my issues with it. This one feels like I'm a lot more comfortable flipping around as a tablet and easily using it in one hand while I touch the screen with the other. It's light enough such that I can do that, maybe not for long periods of time, but at least for some time. Of course, the performance is going to fall behind the HP Spectre and a lot of other modern laptops, since this only has a dual-core i7 7Y75, a dual-core i7 7Y75 processor, which even at the time was not very powerful and didn't draw a lot of power relative to other processors on the market. And so as a result, this thing is not going to fly in terms of multi-core. In daily use, while the XPS 13 can get bogged down and if you have a lot of background processes open, for example, if you got a Windows update running in the background, you will notice this getting a little sluggish. But generally, in terms of web browsing and office work, emails, stuff like that, this thing is going to be absolutely capable. I haven't noticed any big difficulties when working with this relative to even my newer MacBook Air with the M1 chip. Sure, there's a couple of web pages that will load a little bit slower, and I can only do so much web development on this, but for the most part, it felt like a perfectly modern PC. I generally wouldn't recommend gaming on this or photo editing or video editing because it's likely that sustained loads will heat up the device too much, and since it doesn't have a fan to offload that heat, it's just going to get a little bit too toasty and reach thermal throttling limits. The keyboard is decent. The travel is quite comparable to most modern XPS laptops. I will say that the layout is quite cramped, and after long periods of typing on this, my fingers get a little bit fatigued from the spacing and the feedback. But generally, I do enjoy typing on this. There's one big issue that I found with typing on this that I don't have on most laptops. And that's the fact that the keyboard deck is short and a lot of the weight of the device sits in the top half. So the result is if I have this device on my lap, quite often it will tilt just a little bit backwards, and I need to specifically hold it down with my palms in order to comfortably type on it. And this is one of my biggest pet peeves when it comes to laptops. If they're too heavy, if they're too top heavy, such that they tilt backwards like this, I get really, really frustrated over long periods of time having to hold the front down with my palms. It appears that Dell intentionally kept weight out of the bottom half of the device to keep the device relatively balanced. And so the top and bottom halves are about the same thickness and about the same weight. I think they do this specifically so that it feels more natural when you're using it in tablet orientation, but I really wish Dell added a little bit more weight to the device, maybe through a larger battery on the bottom half, in order to give it a more solid base. Because most of the time, I'm using this device as a laptop, a traditional clamshell laptop, and not as a tablet. The trackpad is incredibly smooth and responsive, and I actually really enjoy using it. Of course, it's not very large, so the bottom of the trackpad is actually dedicated to a left and right click section, so there's limited space to click down there. And then in addition, the very top of the trackpad is too stiff in order to press down. So there's only about a third of the vertical height that you can comfortably click down on. But ironically enough, I didn't notice this until I actually looked at the trackpad and saw this happening. When I was just naturally using the trackpad throughout the day, I naturally clicked in the middle of the trackpad, so it didn't really bother me. This model has a fingerprint sensor and an IR sensor baked in, so you can use Windows Hello with either of them. Obviously, the camera is below the device, so this is probably not the best device to be using for work from home without an external webcam. But I guess if you want to use the webcam on this, you can always flip it around and, oh, hey, tent mode. You could use it in tent mode and then have the webcam on the top of the device. I don't know how often you might do this, but it's a solution nonetheless. Even in the correct orientation, this webcam is not particularly flattering, and I wouldn't recommend it for video calls. But it works, and some laptops don't even have a webcam, so this is better than that. So should you pick up a refurbished Dell 9365? Well, if you want a fanless laptop, there's unfortunately not a lot of options out there. There's the new MacBook Airs. There is some models of Surface tablets that don't have fans. But for the most part, most modern laptops do have fans. Now, if you actually modify the fan settings or reduce the power draw of your processors, usually you can make devices with fans hold off and thermal throttle before they hit that temperature at which the fan would turn on. But in terms of a dedicated device, there are not a lot of options out there. And I hope that Dell starts thinking about, once they can catch up in terms of processing capabilities to AMD and Apple, hopefully they'll be able to do so soon, they'll look at making another fanless device. Now, unfortunately, the other source that this sort of device would come from is someone like Microsoft, who would make a dedicated processor for Windows on ARM. So the SQ1 or SQ2 that's found in the Surface Pro X would be excellent for a fanless laptop that could be hopefully very compact. But unfortunately, we've got a little while until Microsoft can catch up in terms of that performance, and Windows on ARM catches up to Windows 10 or Mac OS on ARM. Speaking of which, if you haven't already, be sure to catch my arm wrestling video where I compare macOS on ARM and the Surface Pro X on ARM. It was a pretty good video and I hope you enjoy it. If you aren't already, be sure to get subscribed to watch videos just like this. Finally, I will be selling this device on my eBay page. I'll be listing it for a 7-day auction, so if you are interested in this device, be sure to go to the link in the description, and if you win the auction, enter in this code on the bottom of the screen in order to get a discount on this device. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.